When did being in the wrong place make everyone think you were guilty? I was 17 when 5 minutes destroyed my life. Basketball practice ran late Thursday, and I left the gym at 4:35 with my paycheck from the sporting goods store. Mom needed money for groceries, and the check was $240. The bank closed at 5 and I needed to deposit it. The temperature had dropped to freezing, and I pulled my black hoodie over my head. I drove 6 blocks to First National Bank and pulled into the parking lot at 4:43. The ATM stood near the entrance and I parked close. The cold bit through my hoodie, and I pulled the hood up higher. At exactly 4:47, I stood at the ATM and fed my check into the machine. The transaction took 90 seconds. Deposit confirmed, receipt printed. I folded the receipt and stuffed it in my pocket, then realized I desperately needed to use the bathroom after drinking 2 bottles of water at practice. The bank lobby was warm, and I nodded to the security guard as I walked past. I found the bathroom down a hallway and pushed through the door. It was single occupancy with a lock. I spent 3 minutes inside, then opened the door and stepped back into the hallway. That's when I heard screaming. A woman's voice, terrified, from the lobby. Then a man shouting orders. I stayed frozen in the hallway before the security guard appeared with his gun drawn, pointing at my chest. "Get on the ground. Now. Face down. Hands behind your head." I dropped immediately. I had no idea what was happening. The guard kept his gun on me while shouting into his radio that he had a suspect. I tried to ask what was going on, but he told me to shut up. 2 police officers arrived and flipped me onto my stomach, wrenching my arms behind my back. The handcuffs clicked tight. I kept saying there was a mistake, but nobody answered. They hauled me up and marched me through the bank lobby. Bank tellers were crying, customers huddled near the entrance, and a manager had blood running down his face. The glass door was shattered. One cop said I was under arrest for armed robbery and assault. I'd been in the bathroom. I tried to explain, but he pushed me toward the exit. Outside, 3 police cars sat with lights flashing. They shoved me into the back of one and slammed the door. My car sat in the parking lot where I'd left it. At the police station, they took my hoodie, shoes, phone, wallet. Everything went into plastic bags. A detective named Kowalski sat me in an interrogation room and read me my rights. When he asked if I understood, I nodded. Kowalski was maybe 40 with tired eyes. He opened a folder and pulled out a photograph. Security camera image from the bank, time-stamped 4:47. Me at the ATM, hood up. He asked if that was me, and I said yes. I was depositing my paycheck. He pulled out another photo. Same angle, time-stamp 4:52. Someone in a black hoodie running past the ATM. The face was obscured, but the height and build looked like mine. Kowalski asked if that was also me. I said no. I was in the bathroom at 4:52. He leaned back and asked why my car was still in the parking lot during the robbery. I explained I'd gone inside to use the bathroom. He asked why I didn't use the bathroom at school. I said I didn't think about it. I just needed to go. His expression made it clear he didn't believe me. Kowalski explained what happened while I was in the bathroom. At 4:52, a man in a black hoodie entered the bank and pulled out a handgun, demanding cash from all 4 tellers. The bank manager tried to intervene and got pistol whipped. The robber took $8,000 and ran outside, disappearing into the parking lot. Multiple witnesses described someone matching my height, build, and clothing. The footage showed the robber running past the same ATM where I'd been standing 5 minutes earlier. Kowalski said the timing was too convenient. I case the place at the ATM, go inside allegedly to use the bathroom, and my accomplice comes in to do the robbery. My car stays as a getaway vehicle, but something goes wrong and I get caught inside. I insisted I didn't have an accomplice. Didn't know anything about a robbery. Kowalski asked why I was wearing my hood up if I wasn't trying to hide my face. I said it was cold outside. He asked if I always dressed like a criminal when I went to the bank. I said I was dressed like someone who just finished basketball practice. He didn't look convinced. They kept me in that room for 3 hours. Kowalski left and came back with more questions. Did I have gang affiliations? No. Had I been arrested before? No. Did I know anyone who might rob a bank? No. Where was my phone between 4:30 and 5 In my car. Could anyone verify I was in the bathroom? I didn't think so. The questions went in circles. Around 8 wall, Kowalski said they were holding me pending formal charges. I asked to call my mom. My hands shook as I dialed. When she answered, I barely got the words out. I'm at the police station. They arrested me for robbing a bank. I didn't do anything. Mom said she was coming and I shouldn't say anything else. The officer led me to a holding cell. I sat on the bench and put my head in my hands. The deposit receipt was still in my pocket, time-stamped 4:47. Proof I was at the ATM before the robbery, but apparently not proof I was innocent. Mom arrived an hour later with my aunt, who was a paralegal. They couldn't get me released, but I'd be arraigned in the morning. Mom looked like she'd been crying. Through the glass partition, she kept asking if I was okay. That night in the cell was the longest of my life. I kept replaying the timeline. 4:47 at the ATM, walk into the bank, down the hallway to the bathroom, in the bathroom for 3 minutes. 4:52 when I came out, the robbery happened at 4:52. Same exact minute. If I'd been 30 seconds faster or slower, maybe I would have seen the actual robber. Instead, I was in the wrong place at precisely the wrong time. The arraignment happened at 10 more the next morning. They brought me in wearing an orange jumpsuit and shackles. The public defender assigned to my case was Rebecca Ortiz. The prosecutor, Garfield, laid out the charges: armed robbery, assault, conspiracy. They were seeking to try me as an adult. Ortiz argued for bail. Garfield argued I was a flight risk. Judge Brenner set bail at $50,000. My mom made a sound like she'd been punched. We didn't have that kind of money. The next 3 days, I stayed in juvenile detention. My cellmate Darius was in for stealing cars. He asked what I did, and I said I deposited a check. He laughed and said that was the dumbest cover story. I said it was the truth. He stopped laughing. You serious? You really didn't do anything? I nodded. Man, you're more screwed than I am. At least I actually stole those cars. Ortiz visited on the 3rd day. They'd reviewed all the security footage, and the timeline was devastating. Me, at 4:47. Robber, at 4:52. Me, coming out at 4:55 when police were already there. My car in the parking lot the entire time. The prosecution was building a case that I was the lookout and signaled an accomplice. I asked what evidence they had of an accomplice. Ortiz said they didn't need direct evidence, just make it look plausible to a jury, and the timing made it look plausible. She asked if I had any alibi witnesses. I said no. It was a single-occupancy bathroom with a lock. Nobody saw me. She said we needed to poke holes in their timeline. But even as she said it, I could tell she wasn't confident. She said armed robbery carried a minimum of 10 years in prison. I was 17. I'd be 27 before I got out. Mom scraped together money for a bail bondsman by borrowing from family and putting the house up as collateral. I got released on day 5. Mom hugged me in the parking lot. The drive home was quiet. My younger sister Kayla was watching from the window. She was 13 and looked scared. Inside, she hugged me and asked if I was okay. The local news was running stories about the bank robbery. They'd published my name and photo. 17-year-old arrested in armed robbery. The comments online were brutal. People calling me a thug. Kids from school posting about how they always knew I was trouble. My phone was flooded with messages. I turned it off and threw it across my room. That first night home, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the real robber out there somewhere while I faced 10 years in prison. I pulled out the deposit receipt and stared at it. 4:47:23 p.m. This thin piece of paper was the only proof I had. Ortiz called the next morning. She'd gotten the full security footage and wanted me to watch it with her. Mom drove me downtown to the public defender's office. Ortiz had her laptop open with the footage queued up. We watched it together. 4:47, me at the ATM, hood up. The angle showed my face partially. 4:48, me walking toward the bank entrance. 4:49, me entering the lobby, nodding at the security guard. Then the footage jumped to 4:52. At 4:52, a figure in a black hoodie appeared from the entrance, moved quickly to the teller stations. The face was completely obscured, hood pulled low with a bandana covering the lower half. Height looked similar to mine, build looked similar. The person pulled a gun and started shouting. The bank manager got hit across the face. Cash was stuffed into a bag. The robbery took 90 seconds. At 4:53, the robber ran back toward the entrance and disappeared. At 4:55, I appeared from the bathroom hallway looking confused. The security guard confronted me. Ortiz paused the video. The prosecution would argue the bathroom hallway was a perfect hiding spot, and my timing was too convenient. I asked if there was footage of the parking lot. Ortiz clicked to a different file. Exterior camera showing the lot and ATM. 4:47, me at the ATM. 4:48, me walking toward the entrance. My car remained parked. 4:52, the robber ran past the ATM area, but the angle made it impossible to see which direction they went. The person disappeared behind parked cars. Ortiz said this was a problem because the robber could have had a car waiting anywhere or could have run on foot. The fact that my car stayed put hurt me because it looked like I was waiting. I asked if there were other cameras nearby. Ortiz said she'd requested footage from businesses across the street, but most didn't have cameras facing the bank. I watched the footage 3 more times looking for anything that would prove it wasn't me. The robber's build was similar but not identical. The person moved differently, more aggressive and confident. I was a basketball player with a specific way of walking, and the robber didn't walk like me. I pointed this out to Ortiz. She made a note but said body language analysis was subjective, and juries didn't always buy it. She said our best hope was finding the actual robber or proving the timeline made it physically impossible for me to be involved. But so far, neither looked promising. I went home, feeling worse than before. School started the following Monday, but I couldn't go back. Everyone knew about the arrest. Mom called the principal and arranged for me to do independent study at home. My basketball coach called and said he had to suspend me from the team pending the legal outcome. The college scouts who'd been interested in me stopped calling. My scholarship offers disappeared. Everything I'd worked for was gone. Weeks passed, and Ortiz kept digging. She requested phone records proving I didn't call or text anyone during the relevant time frame. She got my bank records showing I'd never made large cash deposits that would indicate criminal activity. She interviewed the security guard who admitted he didn't actually see me come out of the bathroom. He just saw me standing in the hallway afterward. None of it seemed to matter. The prosecution had their timeline, and they weren't budging. My days blurred together at home. I'd wake up, do schoolwork, stare at my phone, reading hate comments, then go to bed. Kayla tried to cheer me up by bringing me snacks and telling me jokes, but I could barely respond. Mom worked double shifts at the hospital trying to pay for the bondsman and the lawyer fees. Dad had left when I was 12, so it was just the three of us, and now I'd made everything worse. I heard Mom crying in her room some nights and wanted to apologize, but didn't know how. I'd destroyed our family by needing to piss at the wrong time. Then, 5 weeks after my arrest, Ortiz called with news that changed everything. A different bank got robbed 3 towns over. Same M.O., black hoodie, handgun, hit the tellers fast, and ran. This time they caught him. The guy's name was Cameron Voss, 23 years old with a record of armed robberies. Police found cash and a gun in his car. When they showed him footage from my bank robbery, he refused to comment. But his build matched. His height matched. His shoes in the arrest photo matched shoes visible in the security footage from my bank. Ortiz said this was huge. This could prove I wasn't involved. She filed an emergency motion to get Cameron's case files and compare evidence. The prosecutor fought it, arguing Cameron's arrest didn't automatically exonerate me. They could both be guilty. But Judge Brenner allowed limited discovery. Ortiz got access to Cameron's phone records from the day of my arrest. At 4:51, 1 minute before the robbery, Cameron's phone pinged off a cell tower 3 blocks from the bank. At 4:54, right after the robbery, his phone pinged off a tower 5 miles away, heading out of town. The timeline matched perfectly. Cameron was at the bank when the robbery happened. Ortiz presented this to the DA's office and demanded they drop charges against me. The DA refused. Garfield argued Cameron could have been my accomplice. The phone records just proved Cameron was in the area, not that I wasn't involved. Ortiz filed a motion to dismiss based on the new evidence. The hearing was set for 3 days later. I sat in court while Ortiz presented everything. Cameron's arrest, his similar robberies, his phone records, the fact that he matched the security footage better than I did. Garfield countered that circumstantial evidence against Cameron didn't prove my innocence. I could have been the lookout while Cameron did the robbery. Judge Brenner looked skeptical of the prosecution's theory. She asked Garfield directly what evidence connected me to Cameron. Garfield said they were investigating potential connections. Brenner said that wasn't evidence. That was speculation. She asked if they had any phone calls, texts, social media contact, anything showing I knew Cameron. Garfield admitted they didn't. Brenner asked what evidence I was at the bank for any reason other than depositing my paycheck. Garfield said the timing was suspicious. Brenner pointed out that unfortunate timing wasn't evidence of guilt. She asked if they had any witnesses who saw me signal anyone or act as a lookout. Garfield said the witnesses were traumatized and their memories were unclear. Brenner asked if they had any physical evidence connecting me to the robbery. Garfield said my clothing matched the description. Brenner said half the teenagers in the city wore black hoodies. She asked if they had any evidence at all beyond me being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Garfield went quiet. Brenner dismissed the charges. She said the prosecution had failed to present any credible evidence of my involvement, and continuing to hold me would be a miscarriage of justice. She apologized to me directly for what I'd been through and said the system had failed me. The charges were dropped. I was free. I sat there stunned. Mom was crying in the gallery. Ortiz squeezed my shoulder and said it was over. But it didn't feel over. The charges were dropped, but the damage was permanent. My name had been in the news. My photo was online with the word arrested next to it. My scholarship offers were gone. My basketball season was over. My school record had a suspension on it. Colleges would see the arrest, even though charges were dropped. That night, I looked up Cameron Voss online. His arraignment was public record. He was being charged with 4 different bank robberies, including mine. His public defender had him plead guilty in exchange for 20 years. The news article mentioned he'd been robbing banks to fund a drug addiction. He'd chosen banks in different towns to avoid detection. I was just unlucky enough to be at one of his targets at the exact wrong moment. Mom tried to get my life back to normal, but nothing was normal. I went back to school and people stared. Some kids apologized for what they'd posted online. Others avoided me completely. My basketball coach let me back on the team, but I'd missed too much of the season. The scouts weren't interested anymore. My grades had dropped from missing school. I applied to colleges but had to explain the arrest in every application. Most schools rejected me. The ones that didn't offered no financial aid. We couldn't afford tuition without scholarships. I ended up at community college, working part-time at the sporting goods store still. The same job where I'd earned the paycheck that destroyed my life. My boss there, Mr. Gilmore, had kept my position open during the whole ordeal. He was one of the few people who never doubted me. He'd seen me working every weekend for 2 years, saving money for college, never causing problems. When I came back after the charges were dropped, he pulled me aside and said he was proud of how I'd handled everything. It was the first time an adult outside my family had said anything supportive. I almost cried right there in the stockroom. But even Mr. Gilmore's kindness couldn't fix what had been broken. I'd see customers sometimes who recognized me from the news. They'd stare or whisper to whoever they were with. One woman actually moved to a different register when she saw I was working the cash. She didn't say anything, but her message was clear. I was still guilty in her eyes. 2 years later, I was 19 and still living at home, taking classes and working. Cameron Voss was in prison serving his 20 years. The bank had settled a small civil suit with my family for the wrongful arrest, enough to help with some bills, but not enough to change our lives. Mom said I should be grateful the charges were dropped and I could move forward. But moving forward felt impossible when everyone still remembered me as the kid who got arrested for bank robbery. I'd see people from high school and watch them whisper. I'd apply for jobs and see the hesitation when they ran my background check. The arrest showed up even though charges were dismissed. I had to explain it every time. One afternoon, I was at the bank, the same First National where everything happened. I needed to deposit my paycheck, the same routine that had destroyed my life 2 years earlier. I stood at the ATM, the exact same spot, and felt my hands shaking. The memory of that day crashed over me. The cold, the black hoodie, the deposit receipt, the bathroom, the screaming, the gun pointed at my face. I almost left without making the deposit, but I forced myself to feed the check into the machine. The transaction completed. Receipt printed. I folded it and put it in my pocket. Then I walked to my car and sat there for 10 minutes, breathing hard. The security guard from that day was gone. The bank had upgraded their cameras. The shattered door had been replaced. Everything looked normal except me. I wasn't normal anymore. I'd never be normal again. Being in the wrong place at the wrong time had stolen my future. And even though I was free, even though the charges were dropped, even though everyone knew Cameron was the real robber, I was still guilty in the eyes of everyone who remembered that day. Guilty of being unlucky, guilty of needing to piss at 4:52 instead of 4:45, guilty of wearing a black hoodie on a cold day, guilty of being 17 and black and in the wrong place when someone decided to rob a bank. That was the part nobody wanted to say out loud, but everyone knew. Kowalski had looked at me and seen a criminal because of what I looked like. The security guard had pointed his gun at me without hesitation. The prosecutor had built a case on nothing but timing and clothing because it was easy to believe a black kid in a hoodie was guilty. Judge Brenner had apologized, but she couldn't give me back what I'd lost. The system had chewed me up and spit me out and told me to be grateful I wasn't in prison. I sat in that parking lot and looked at the bank entrance. Somewhere in the world, other 17-year-olds were making deposits without fear. They were going to college on scholarships. They were playing basketball and making plans and living normal lives. And I was here, 2 years later, still carrying the weight of 5 minutes that weren't my fault. Still explaining to everyone I met that I wasn't a criminal, I was just unlucky. Still wondering if I'd ever stop being the kid who got arrested at the bank. The deposit receipt was in my pocket, just like 2 years ago. Evidence of innocence that nobody had believed until it was almost too late. I started my car and drove away from First National Bank for the last time. I'd never go back there again. I'd use ATMs at different banks, drive out of my way if necessary. I couldn't stand in that spot anymore. Couldn't relive that day over and over. Couldn't keep paying for a crime I didn't commit. Mom had said time would heal everything, but she was wrong. Time just made the wound permanent. Made it part of who I was now. The kid who got arrested. The almost felon. The one who lost everything because he needed to use a bathroom. I was 19 years old and my life was defined by 5 minutes I couldn't change, couldn't explain, couldn't escape. Kayla was 15 now and doing well in school. She wanted to be a doctor and I encouraged her every chance I got. I didn't want her dreams getting crushed like mine had. She'd ask me sometimes about college and I'd lie and say, community college was exactly what I wanted, that I was taking my time figuring things out. She was smart enough to know I was lying, but kind enough not to push. Sometimes late at night, I'd think about the parallel universe where I didn't need to use that bathroom, where I finished my deposit at 4:47 and drove straight home. In that universe, I graduated high school with a 3.8 GPA and a basketball scholarship to a Division II school. I studied sports medicine and became a physical therapist. I had a normal life with normal problems. But that universe didn't exist for me. I lived in this one, where a full bladder and unfortunate timing had stolen everything. My therapist, who I'd started seeing 6 months after the arrest, said I needed to stop thinking about what could have been and focus on what was. She said I was young and still had opportunities, but she didn't understand that the arrest would follow me forever. Background checks, Google searches, people's memories, it never went away. I'd started volunteering at a youth center in our neighborhood, helping kids with homework and running basketball clinics. It was the only place where people didn't know about my past, where I could just be someone helping out. The kids there looked up to me, and I didn't want to disappoint them. One of them, a 12-year-old named Marcus, reminded me of myself at that age. Smart, athletic, trying to stay out of trouble in a neighborhood where trouble found you anyway. I told him to keep his head down, work hard, and stay away from situations that could go wrong. He asked me why I never went to a big college if I was so good at basketball. I told him life didn't always work out the way you planned. He seemed to understand that more than he should have at 12. The anniversary of my arrest came and went. 3 years since that Thursday afternoon. I was 20 now and had managed to piece together a life that looked almost normal from the outside. I was taking classes toward an associate's degree, working full-time at the sporting goods store, and had started seeing a girl named Tasha who went to my community college. She knew about the arrest because I'd told her on our third date, figuring it was better she heard it from me than someone else. She'd listened to the whole story and then said, That's messed up. I'm sorry that happened to you. Not, are you sure you didn't do it? Or, there must have been some reason they arrested you. Just genuine sympathy for something terrible that wasn't my fault. That's when I knew I liked her. But even with Tasha, even with the volunteer work and the therapy and the attempt at moving forward, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was living a smaller life than I was supposed to. Every time I drove past a university campus, I felt the loss. Every time I watched basketball on TV, I remembered what could have been. Every time someone asked where I went to school, and I said community college, I saw their expression change slightly. Not everyone got to restart their life after it got destroyed. Some of us just learned to live in the wreckage. One day, about 3.5 years after my arrest, Mr. Gilmore called me into his office at the sporting goods store. He said he was promoting me to assistant manager. It came with a raise and more responsibility. I thanked him and shook his hand, feeling grateful, but also hollow. Assistant manager at a sporting goods store at 20 years old wasn't the life I'd imagined, but it was the life I had, and I was lucky to have even that. Some people in my situation ended up with nothing. That night, I told Mom about the promotion, and she cried happy tears and hugged me tight. She said she was so proud of me for making something of my life despite everything. Kayla made my favorite dinner to celebrate, and Tasha came over with a cake. It was a good night, almost normal, almost like we were a regular family celebrating a regular achievement. But underneath it all, I felt the weight of those 5 minutes from 3.5 years ago. The what-ifs and could-have-beens that would never stop haunting me. I was 20 years old with an arrest record, a GED, instead of a high school diploma from my original school, and a future that looked nothing like what I'd planned. And all because I'd needed to use the bathroom at the worst possible moment, in the worst possible place. That was my life now. Not the life I'd worked for or deserved, but the life I got dealt. And I had to find a way to make peace with it, because fighting reality was exhausting and pointless. The charges had been dropped. Cameron Voss was in prison. Judge Brenner had apologized. But none of that gave me back what I'd lost. None of that changed the fact that being in the wrong place at the wrong time had destroyed my future before it even started. And I'd carry that weight forever, no matter how many years passed or how much success I managed to build from the ruins. I was guilty of nothing except bad timing and bad luck. But in the end, that was all it took to lose everything. Appreciate you watching this far. If you enjoyed it, drop a like, leave a comment, and subscribe so you won't miss the next story.